Some counterfeits were so good that the people who printed the real money couldn't tell the difference. These are the forgers who came within inches of breaking entire economies. Counterfeiting isn't petty crime. It's an attack on belief, and belief is the only thing holding paper money together. The forgers you're about to meet made bills that banks accepted, experts approved, and governments quietly redesigned their currency to escape. One operation was run by an army, inside a concentration camp, as a weapon of war. Imagine forging coins so convincing that the Royal Mint couldn't tell them from its own. William Chaloner was a London con man in the 1690s who mastered counterfeiting English silver and gold coins. His fakes matched royal coinage almost perfectly, and the money made him rich, bold, and finally reckless. Because getting quietly wealthy wasn't enough for Chaloner, he publicly accused the Royal Mint of incompetence. Bad timing. The Mint's newly appointed warden was Isaac Newton, and he took the insult personally. Newton didn't handle it from behind a desk. He disguised himself, haunted London taverns, and gathered hidden evidence out of the city's underworld. Then he did what Newton always did, he built a meticulous case from forensic detail, witness by witness, coin by coin. Chaloner was convicted of high treason for counterfeiting and hanged in 1699. Here's a detail almost nobody knows. Chaloner once tricked officials into paying him to expose counterfeiters, using knowledge from his own crimes. A consultant funded by the very fraud he was consulting on. Newton's investigation permanently reshaped how Britain protected its currency. But not every counterfeiter ran into a genius. Some needed nothing more than patience and a household iron. A colonial housewife outsmarted every bank in New England using laundry equipment. Mary Butterworth ran a secret counterfeiting operation in Rhode Island in the early 1700s, and her method was almost insultingly simple. She pressed a damp cloth onto a real note, then ironed the image onto blank paper. That transferred a near-perfect impression of the printed design. Family members redrew and inked the transferred pattern by hand, so her forged notes closely matched the genuine colonial currency already in circulation. Local merchants trusted the family's reputation and rarely questioned the bills. Why would they? These were neighbors, not criminals. Over several decades, she and her relatives printed thousands of dollars. Authorities suspected her, raided repeatedly, and found no printing plates, because there were no plates to find. She was tried multiple times and never convicted, always for lack of evidence. Here's the twist, she reportedly burned the evidence in her fireplace before every search. Cloth and paper burn beautifully. Copper plates don't. Her success proved paper currency desperately needed better security features, and it embarrassed colonial banks that couldn't catch her for years. Decades later, another entrepreneur turned counterfeiting into something stranger still, and advertised it in the newspapers. A Philadelphia shopkeeper nearly wrecked an entire nation's currency, and he did it in broad daylight. In 1862, Samuel Upham began printing near-exact copies of Confederate banknotes. He sold them as souvenirs, with a tiny disclaimer most buyers ignored. Traders smuggled these so-called facsimiles south and spent them as real money. Confederate merchants accepted them because the detail looked convincing enough, and Upham's notes flooded southern markets already suffering rampant inflation. Historians say his prints deepened public distrust in Confederate currency nationwide, and distrust is the one thing paper money cannot survive. Confederate officials condemned him publicly and offered rewards for his capture. Here's what most people don't know. Upham advertised his products in northern newspapers and never hid his name. No secret basement, no code name, no false identity. Just a businessman selling novelties to tourists. And he made only a modest personal profit from the whole scheme. That's the uncomfortable part, the money he earned was small, while his impact on the southern economy was disproportionately massive. One shopkeeper, working openly, helped destabilize a nation's money. Not every forger aimed that high, though. One man's crude bills fooled federal agents for over a decade, a single dollar at a time. One counterfeiter's crude dollar bills fooled federal agents for over a decade. Emmerich Jutner was an elderly immigrant living in New York City, and through the 1930s and 1940s he printed his own $1 bills. His plate was rough, a hand-carved zinc etching, and the bills carried obvious flaws. They passed unnoticed among small shopkeepers anyway, year after year. The Secret Service nicknamed him Mr. 880, and he became their oldest unsolved case. Agents chased false leads across the city for over 10 years, hunting a professional criminal who didn't exist. The truth was almost boring. Jutner spent his counterfeit sparingly, avoiding any hint of suspicion, living quietly and using the fake money only for small daily purchases. No spree. No accomplices. No greed. Investigators finally caught him in 1948 after a small printing error. Here's the detail few know: he only ever printed $1 bills, judging larger notes too risky. Think about that. The man who outran federal investigators longer than anyone else did it by deliberately refusing to get rich. His unlikely story later inspired a Hollywood comedy film. Not every forger settled for pocket change, though. One con man convinced wealthy buyers he could print money itself. One con man convinced wealthy buyers he could print money on demand. Victor Lustig was a European con artist active in the early 1900s, and his masterpiece was a wooden box that supposedly duplicated real currency. Buyers paid thousands to stand in a hotel room and watch it produce crisp $100 bills. What they never knew was that Lustig had loaded the box with pre-made counterfeits before they walked in. The genius wasn't the machine. It was the waiting, the theater, the patience of a man who knew greed does the persuading for you. And the counterfeits weren't props. Lustig ran a full-scale ring producing high-quality American currency, forged bills sharp enough to fool bank tellers repeatedly. Secret Service agents pursued him across several countries for years before finally arresting him in New York City in 1935. Here's a detail worth remembering: Lustig once sold the Eiffel Tower using forged government credentials. The tower. With paperwork. He died in Alcatraz prison, still regarded as a legendary con man, and his flawless forgeries pushed American banks to upgrade anti-counterfeit ink technology. A strange legacy, that. Across the Atlantic, another man skipped forging money altogether and forged the paperwork instead. One scheme nearly broke a country's central bank without printing a single fake note. Artur Alves Reis was a Portuguese businessman working in the 1920s, and his weapon was paperwork. He forged authorization documents claiming to represent the Bank of Portugal. With those papers in hand, he persuaded a British printing firm to produce banknotes for him. Real ones. The notes were technically genuine, printed from authentic government plates by professionals doing their jobs properly. Then Reis flooded Portugal with millions of legitimate-looking escudo notes. The money supply inflated, and national public trust shook. Here's the wild part: because the notes were genuinely printed, no counterfeit test could ever catch them. Ink analysis wouldn't help. Paper testing wouldn't help. Every check came back clean, because the money was clean. Investigators eventually traced suspicious serial numbers back to his shell companies, the single crack in an otherwise perfect crime. The scandal forced Portugal's central bank to redesign its entire currency. Reis was arrested in 1925 and served over a decade in prison, and his case remains history's only true real fake money scandal. One American artist later tested currency law from the opposite direction, armed with nothing but a pen. One artist made drawings that spent like real money at the corner shop. J.S.G. Boggs was an American artist working in the 1980s and 1990s who hand-drew detailed replicas of paper currency as artwork. Then came the unusual part. He offered those drawings to merchants directly, at face value, and many shopkeepers accepted them, treating his art as cash. Boggs called it performance art, a question posed in ink: what actually gives money its value? The Secret Service was not in the mood for philosophy. Agents repeatedly raided his studios and seized artwork as evidence, and he faced investigations in multiple countries over currency law violations. Courts never convicted him of counterfeiting, because there was no fraudulent intent. He told every merchant exactly what he was handing them. Here's the twist: his drawings later sold at auctions for far more than their printed value. A hand-drawn bill worth more than the bill it copied. Boggs argued his art exposed how trust, not paper, creates money's worth, and his case forced a genuine legal debate over the definition of counterfeiting itself. While Boggs drew bills for art, one nation allegedly printed them for war. In the 1990s, investigators found $100 bills they couldn't prove were fake. Experts nicknamed them supernotes, for print quality that had no business existing outside a mint. The forgeries used the same intaglio printing process as genuine currency, the same cotton linen paper, matching security threads. Detecting them required specialized lab equipment rather than the naked eye, which meant a bank teller never stood a chance. Some supernotes reportedly circulated for years before anyone noticed. Investigators allegedly traced production to North Korean state-run facilities, and North Korea has consistently denied involvement despite mounting international evidence. Banks worldwide tightened detection protocols once the discovery became public, and the U.S. Treasury eventually redesigned the $100 bill twice to fight them. Twice. That isn't a police response, that's an arms race. Here's the unsettling detail: some supernotes were reportedly printed better than official American currency itself. Read that sentence again. The scandal exposed serious vulnerabilities in global currency security systems, and it raised a darker fear, that counterfeiting had become a tool of economic warfare, a weapon aimed not at buildings but at trust. One modern counterfeiter, though, needed no government behind him at all. One counterfeiter needed no government and no army of engravers, just ambition and patience. Frank Barassa was a Canadian man with no criminal printing background at all. In the early 2000s, he taught himself to replicate US $20 bills, which sounds like a hobby until you see the results. He imported specialized paper and ink from Germany to match the originals exactly. His bills passed ultraviolet light and the pen detection tests banks rely on. Working quietly out of a rented warehouse for years, he printed an estimated $250 million in counterfeit currency. Not bad for a self-taught man with a warehouse and a stubborn streak. Authorities finally arrested him in 2012 after an undercover investigation. Then came the part that irritates people most. He avoided years in prison by surrendering his plates and his profits. Here's what few know: experts called his forgeries among the best ever made by an individual. Barassa later became a paid consultant on currency security systems. The counterfeiter, hired to stop counterfeiting. His story proved a determined amateur could rival state-level operations entirely. But no counterfeit scheme in history compares to the one built inside a concentration camp. No counterfeit scheme in history compares to the one built inside a concentration camp. In 1942, Nazi Germany launched Operation Bernhard, a covert forgery program. SS officers forced skilled Jewish prisoners at Sachsenhausen to forge British pounds. Many of these prisoners had been printers, engravers, and banknote specialists before the war, and that expertise became the reason they were kept alive. Their forgeries reportedly fooled Bank of England experts during testing. The plan was simple and brutal: flood Britain with fake currency and collapse its wartime economy from the inside, without firing a shot. Millions of counterfeit pounds were printed, some of them funding Nazi espionage abroad. As the war turned against Germany, officers loaded crates of the evidence and dumped them into an Austrian lake. Here's the haunting detail: divers recovered those crates decades later, and the notes were still legible. Surviving prisoners later testified about their forced labor at post-war trials. The operation remains one of the largest currency forgery schemes ever documented, and it forced Britain to redesign its banknotes after the war. It also proves something uncomfortable. Wartime economics could be as dangerous as bombs, and a printing press could be aimed like one. Every counterfeiter in this list proves the same uncomfortable thing: money works only because we agree to believe in it. Make the fake indistinguishable from the real, and the belief starts to wobble. So which of these forgers do you think did the most economic damage? Tell me below. Next time, the flip side: hyperinflations that turn perfectly genuine banknotes into worthless paper overnight.